What's happening, people? Welcome back to the anniversary with me, Yinka Bokinni, your true crime tales told by a true crime addict. Simple. It's Easter Sunday, so I thought I'd keep it quick and snappy and just get stuck right into it, because today I wanted to tell you about Ruth Ellis. Now, she was the last woman to ever be hung in Britain, the last woman that was punished by capital punishment. Mad. And this week marks the anniversary of the crime that would see her hung. Shwa na na na, shwa 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 shwa. So this week in 1955, on Easter Sunday actually, Ruth Ellis pulled up to the Magdala pub in Hampstead in London, and she shot her on-again, off-again and abusive boyfriend David Blakely to death. She fired 6 shots and 4 of them hit their target on a busy street outside the drinking tavern pub place. She was charged, tried and hanged all within about 3 months of the murder, which is very efficient, and to you or I in modern day Britain it might seem a little bit fast, but back then, conviction to execution in the England anyway, there was minimal time. So Ruth and David, they met while she was working in the club scene in London in 1953. Ruth was a working class lady and David part of the upper echelon. The class system seemed to melt away when people were in at the dance, right? And it often saw lower class women chilling, rubbing shoulders, elbows with upper class men. And let's not pretend that class wasn't a thing in 1953. Let's not even pretend that it's not a thing now, but that's another video. At this time, Ruth was the manager of a nightclub called the Little Club, and that is where she met David. The pair are full of lust immediately, and within weeks he moved into her flat. By the way, he was engaged to another woman at the time. I think it's safe to say that Ruth was a little bit of a dirty secret for David. From my reading, the way it kind of seems to go, the way I see it, is that under the cloak of darkness, Blakely and people like him, they would visit the clubs and the shubs and they would chill with the girls, but in the daytime they'd have their pretty little wives in their pretty little houses. Coming from Peckham, I kind of get what this is like though, because you know, you got those dudes from Buckinghamshire or Cambridge or whatever palace they're from, and they want a little bit of rough on a Friday. They want to spice up their lives at Frank's Cafe or Peckham levels, but then they have to be at brunch 11 AM sharp on Saturday for mummy to keep the trust fund going. So I see you guys ruining my ends. When Ruth met David, she already had a son, and she soon became pregnant with his baby. At this point, David was a lot more into Ruth than she was him, and I read somewhere that she couldn't reciprocate the amount of affection, the amount of effort that David was putting in the relationship, and she actually ended up having an abortion. Over the next 2 years, their relationship between Ruth and David did continue, but it was very much on and off, both of them seeing other people in between seeing each other. It's all a little bit confusing. There's loads of names kind of mentioned. I'll put them all in the description in case you want to get more of an insight into what happened, but they kept contact with each other anyway. It seems like David became more and more violent as the years went on. I can't reiterate enough that their relationship wasn't public. She didn't go and meet his family. She wasn't invited to, you know, Christmas dinners or the opera. I don't know what people used to do for fun back then. It was just after the war, things were a bit peak, but things definitely got a bit more violent as the years went on. And when I talk about the way that David treated Ruth, when I speak about his privileged upbringing, I don't think that he deserved to be gunned down in the street. I just want to give you a very good idea of why I actually don't think Ruth should have been found guilty of murder. In January of 1955, Ruth suffered a miscarriage after a particularly violent argument with David where he punched her in the stomach. Attitudes towards domestic abuse during those times was not what it is now at all. Ruth even used to say that the reason that she always had bruises on her was that she bruised easily, not because her boyfriend was beating her up. It seems like Ruth reached breaking point by Easter Sunday of 1955. She went looking for Blakely when he flat out refused to speak to her, and she saw his car parked outside the pub in Hampstead. She was with a man called Desmond Cusson. I read somewhere he was a friend, I read somewhere that he was a lover, I'm not entirely sure. He actually gave her the gun, and side note, he wasn't charged or arrested or accused of any type of offence in this case. He was just treated as a witness, which I think is a bit mad personally. I've read statements from Ruth's son and family members who said that this dude Cusson took her target practice, he taught her how to use the gun. So Ruth walked into the pub and she shot Blakely twice. He went running and she chased. She gunned him down in the street. She was arrested by an off-duty policeman who was drinking at the pub. And during the police investigation of this case, they discovered that Ruth had been admitted to hospital due to some of the beatings that she had suffered at the hands of David, that he often punched and he slapped her. And whilst the prosecution in the case couldn't deny that Ruth was treated badly by the man that she had loved and killed, and that she wasn't in the right frame of mind at the time of the killing, they didn't think that these things were evidence enough to reduce her charge from murder to manslaughter. And that's really important, because in the UK in 1955, if you were found guilty of murder, it was an automatic death sentence. The fact that the court didn't recognise that years of sustained abuse were relevant to her defence, so it's just showing you the archaic system and the sexist system as well that was in place in the UK at that time, because it was very much a domestic disturbance, a husband beating his wife, stay out of that, that's their business type thing. Ruth's defence didn't even think that it was relevant to their case. They didn't present her as a woman who had been abused, as a woman who had been beaten. They encouraged her to bleach her hair and wear flashy suits and look, you know, very kind of pin-up doll-esque. She kind of looked a little bit like Marilyn Monroe, or like the women on Broadway that you see, and it didn't show her to be, I don't want to say victim, but you know, I can't think of a better word. After 14 minutes of deliberation, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, and Ruth was sent to Holloway Prison in North London to wait for her execution. In the UK at the time, although the death penalty was the automatic sentence for somebody who was guilty of murder, 90% of women who received the death penalty were actually reprieved, and the British public just assumed that would happen. Hundreds of letters were sent to the courts and to Parliament to give Ruth a reprieve. Everyone just thought it would happen. She was an abused woman. She was a single mother to a boy who was just 11 years old at the time, but a reprieve never came. And in July of 1955, Ruth Ellis was hung in a cell at Holloway Prison in London. It actually took 10 years for the death penalty to be completely abolished in the UK after the killing of Ruth Ellis. But I think it's safe to say that the British public were shaken, because they were a little bit outraged. You know, I've read headlines and seen quite a few articles about people calling for the end of it after they killed Ruth. Public sympathy for her was so high, and for her son as well was so high. He was at boarding school at the time, and someone had to let him know that he doesn't have any parents anymore. Even though men after Ruth were executed, this case really changed the tone and the way that the death penalty was seen in the UK. For me personally, I am not an advocate for the death penalty. I just think that it's just very final. I'm a believer in rehabilitation. Not everybody sees it that way. When I'm researching for this little series that I do, I see so many cases of people who are found to be innocent after the death penalty. And if you were like, all right, if you want this person to die because of the crimes they committed, here you go, Yinka, here's the axe, like cut their head off, or here's the syringe, inject that shit. Yeah, I wouldn't do it. So that's why I don't really believe in death penalty. But you are allowed to believe in whatever you believe in. Although in the UK, we don't do them things there. So that's it. There you have it. A little bit of a quick one, but still an interesting one nonetheless. The case of Ruth Ellis, who this week, 65 years ago, killed David Blakely and became the last woman to be executed in the UK. Happy Easter.